Let's go over to West Virginia. They're back with Rich Rod. All right. And look, some of you who've maybe following our videos, right, and saw our video on Scott Frost, okay, you asked me this question before air, right? Because we both talked about this and we're like, we both love this hire, right? Like we both love this hire, right? With Rich Rod. And you asked the question, you're like, okay, like we're gonna have to justify like why is this different than Scott Frost? For so many reasons it's different, guys.
Without a doubt. I mean,
For so many reasons.
First of all, obviously, if you're a West Virginia fan watching this, or even just like you know who Rich Rodriguez is, obviously, and the success he had, at West Virginia, especially there, and also too, like, and I'm not, this is not going to affect my grade because I don't think it should really, but like his relationship with Pat McAfee, I think is one that's just interesting, right? Because Pat McAfee, loves to like give out money and all that kind of stuff and like do all these fun things. And like, I think that's going to be a fun partnership. They're obviously like, it's not the end all be all. It's not going to change my grade at all. But like that kind of relationship he has with Pat McAfee, I do not think is only just with Pat McAfee. And in a day where fundraising and buy-in is so important, I think Rich Rod gets it. He's been in a lot of different programs. He learned what he did wrong at Michigan. He went to Arizona and had actual success there, by the way. And in Arizona, I think, Jed Fish, I think this past couple seasons, like that kind of spoiled you into what that program actually is. Like it's hard to win there. And he did that. He was a record coach there. He also, did his dues, being offensive coordinators and analysts, in the lower levels, working his way up to Jacksonville State, bringing them up to FBS, having crazy success for 2 seasons. And now he's back to West Virginia. And like you said, like this is different than Scott Frost. Scott Frost, like hit it big 1 year. He has made a ton of money on 1 year of coaching. And not to say that he's a bad coach and not to say he can't replicate that in multiple years at UCF. I just find this so much more safer as a hire. People labeled, the Scott Frost hire as like a safe hire, bringing him back to UCF where he's won before. To me,
No.
this is much, much, much safer than that kind of hire. Rich Rod, you know what you're going to get from him. I think you know what you're going to get offensively and his kind of brand there. He's also like a West Virginia, like through and through. Born in Granttown, played for West Virginia. This is his 4th different stint as a Mountaineer, as a Mountaineer coach, right? So he played for him. He was a coach a couple times. Obviously, he was the head coach then, and now he's back. Yeah, you talked about. I think it's just a funny thought to kind of go through, and it's a good thought exercise to be like, okay, why is this better than Scott Frost? Because there are similarities, and we're gonna have different grades than we did on Scott Frost, and obviously a different tone going into it than we did with Scott Frost. And they'll be playing each other right in the Big 12, so that's also hilarious too. But yeah, this is awesome. I think West Virginia and Rich Rod, I think is a great fit for college football. I think it'll be very fun.
Yeah, the interesting part that I found with grading this higher though, it's like because everything's relative, right? We're gonna say this over and over again, right? Because we cut each coach into individual videos, right? But it is imperative that you grade these coaches relative to expectations, right? My difficulty was finding like what those actual expectations are for the program of West Virginia, right? And do those expectations raise literally just because you hired Rich Rodriguez? Like, I want to believe yes, and as silly as that is, as a fan base and like from national media perspective, like just because you literally hired him, the expectations have already raised. Even though this program does have the expectations, it does have a decent history of success in the modern college football era, and while it's difficult being in the Big 12 with their geography, like it's not bad geography. You're right there in Pennsylvania, basically. West Virginia has decent talent. Ohio has decent talent that you can get into, and they've had a lot of success before. And Rich Rodriguez is literally coming from Jacksonville State, right, where he took that program, right, in just 2 years, and absolutely changed it around insanely, right? At the Division I FBS level, he had success both years that he was at the FBS level, and like running the ball more effectively than any team in college football this past year. That's a big deal. And for a team that should have run the ball better than they did last year, it's very how do you say that? Like just comforting, knowing that you have the potential to actually use your elite running backs and offensive line effectively.
Yeah, now obviously we're hoping Jaheim White stays a Mountaineer. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, with who Chad Scott going over to Texas, so the running backs coach. But all intents and purposes, I'm assuming Jaheim White's on the team, and that's not going to change Mike Grant that much, right? Like it's one player.
No,
He's an elite football player, obviously, but Rich Rodriguez will be just fine. I mean, we saw what he did with Trey Stewart and Tyler Huff this past season. I'm not too worried about that. So let's talk about the contract that Rich Rodriguez signed. So he signed a 5-year deal. It's like $18.5 million. He's guaranteed 7.5 million, and also gets other like incentives for his support staff and one other things. So he'll make 3.5 million in his first year. Every year after that, it'll make basically 100,000 more for a couple seasons, and then they'll have a discussion about a potential extension, whatever that means. I mean, doesn't guarantee nothing, but boom, boom, boom. They also are buying out his contract at Jacksonville State, so it's 1.25 million. So West Virginia will pay that. If he has to leave, basically he pays 25% of his remaining salary, which is pretty low if you ask me for a head football coach, which I think is just negotiating good faith there. If West Virginia fires Rich Rod ahead of schedule, basically before his contract's up, it'll owe him, 50% of his salary, and then he'll get different bonuses. I think the interesting one is the regular season bonuses. So a lot of times you'll see these, bonuses for like winning coach of the year, winning your Big 12, going to a playoff, making a bowl game. Like that's all standard, I think, in a lot of contracts I've read this offseason. The interesting one is the regular season win total. So if he wins 8, he gets $100,000. It's 9, it's another $100,000 to $200,000. 10, it's 300,000. So it's very interesting to see, like, you talk about expectation, like that's kind of what it's going to be. Is like you meet expectations. You're winning 8, 9 games a year. Like you're going to
you're
get
getting
paid
paid.
for it, which is awesome. Now, $100,000 is a lot of money, but obviously, like it's not compared to the 3.5 million. It's not like it's just massive, difference there. But it's obviously something of note. They're also going to have a $5 million budget for the assistant coaches, and then also at least 2.5 million for the support staff. And then it's an interesting one. They're paying him about $100,000 to like help him relocate, and for other like reasonable moving expenses, and then like some temporary housing stuff that's kind of like small, but it's interesting. Obviously, like this is a good contract, and it's a lot different because we've talked about a lot of G5 programs this offseason, and you're seeing their contract details, and you're also seeing how their support staff details are. And this is obviously a massive step up from that because it should be, because it's West Virginia, because it's the Big 12. And obviously, you're making a big commitment to bring back Rich Rodriguez in a similar sense we talked about with Bill Belichick in North Carolina. Like, I think that to me, what gets me excited about it is like the different things that Rich Rodriguez wanted, I'm sure, to come back to West Virginia, and that they're going to fulfill for him to put him in positions to win.
Yeah, he's had success at so many places, and people always want to bring up that Michigan stint. Who cares? It was 3 years. Program was in shambles. I'm ready to move on from that if everyone else is, because that was 15 years ago.
Well, and remember that whole debacle? Like it was Richard was going to Alabama, and then all of a sudden, is it Bill Battle? I think was the AD at Bama at the time, and he goes out and gets Nick Saban on the plane. It was just a
Just ended up being all
wild
right.
flip
It's a good
Ruski
decision.
there. But at the time, like Rich Rod was a hot hire. He had just won he was dominating the Big East. It was 11 wins, 10 wins, and like they were oh so close to going to the national title game, in with Pat White and some of those guys. But yeah, it's interesting. Rich Rod's back, man. Rich Rod's back.
Yeah, I'm excited to see what that Big 12 is going to look like, because you have some really interesting offenses, you have some really interesting defenses, and in the Big 12, by the way, when you're seeing more adjustments now, but like to counter, the high flying offenses that were passing the ball, right? A lot of these coaches developed 3 through 5 defenses, right? And they're just sitting back, whatever. Which is kind of like left. We talk about football being cyclical. There's room to run the ball in the Big 12, and we've seen it the last couple years. some of these coaches still haven't changed off of their 3-3-5 defenses, which is unbelievable, right? And a lot of these coaches, we call them 3-3-5 defenses, but they're really like multiple, and like they'll give different looks. So like there is adjustments from some of these coaches, but you can run the ball in the Big 12. So
Yeah,
this is just
ironically, I was
unbelievable.
cruising some West Virginia message boards and trying to like get in touch with what they're thinking about the hire, and they're upset about Zach Alley, who I love at defense coordinator and what he runs as a 3-3-5. But it's ironic. It's hilarious, like you
It
said.
is. It is.
But also like yeah, he said success. But let's get in that coaching staff. If that's all right. So the quarterbacks, there's like three. So again, keep in mind here, it's going to be a lot different talking about West Virginia than it is talking about other conferences because that we've done in the G5. Remember, I think in June there was a vote to remove like limitations on how many on-field coaching staff members could be provided to help on game days. So like previously you were only allowed to have like the head coach and then 10 assistant coaches, and that was it on field. And then you had all your analysts and everyone else in the booth. But now it's a lot different. So you're going to see a couple different, like you're going to see more coaches we'll talk about here in West Virginia than with some other programs just because of that. So just keep that in mind when you see three different quarterbacks coaches. Okay, so quarterbacks coach is Rhett Rodriguez, and there's going to be a lot of familiar names here in the quarterback room. Rhett Rodriguez is Rich Rodriguez's son, and so obviously we know our West Virginia fans were just thrilled with that and some nepotism there. But no, he was an analyst at Jacksonville State this past season. He's had success and has like a lot of experience working with quarterbacks and obviously that chemistry with his father. So that's interesting there. Another other quarterbacks coach is Travis Trickett. He was on Neil Brown's staff, back in from 2019 to 2021. He was also a student assistant for Rich Rodriguez from 03 to 06. And then other quarterbacks coaches, Pat White, right? Pat White is back. Former West Virginia legendary quarterback, Heisman kind of finalist guy with Rich Rodriguez back in that late 2000s era. So that's fun there. So the running backs coach I mentioned was Chad Scott. He's heading on his way to Texas. We're still unsure who that running backs coach is be. That was pretty recent thing. We're recording this in late February, and we're not.
So I could
sure.
change by the time that this video comes out. So
yeah,
because this video probably won't be posted for another like 2 weeks, so I could absolutely change.
Keep that in mind there when you're seeing that. The O-line coach is Jack Bicknell Jr. Bicknell was Wisconsin's offensive line coach in 2023, but was like kind of rearranged in the athletic department, after that season, because Wisconsin was switching over to a different kind of offense. He was also the O-line coach at Ole Miss when Rich Rodriguez was there as the OC back in 2019. So that's the connection there. And by the way, too, like at Wisconsin, he recruited and developed some pretty damn good O-linemen. Let's keep that in mind there too. Wide receivers coach is Ryan Garrett. Ryan Garrett, was with Rich Rodriguez the last 3 seasons as wide receiver coach. He was also a GA at Ole Miss with Rodriguez and Bicknell, which is nice there. He also coached under Rich Rodriguez at ULM in 2021 when Rodriguez was the OC there. So there's a lot of connection there with a couple members on staff. The tight ends coach is Michael Nicewander. He's awesome football player. If you remember him back in the mid 2010s with Derrick Henry, lining up as H-back and blocking for him in his Heisman Trophy season. He was an analyst for 3 seasons for Lane Kiffin, obviously, so not the connection. No overlap with Rich Rod at Ole Miss, but obviously the connection there playing for Kiffin at Alabama as the tight end and H-back. The inside wide receivers coach is going to be Blaine Stewart. He coached tight ends the past couple seasons with West Virginia. This is his 3rd year now. So that's why I talk about there's a couple more coaches in the offense side of the ball than we're used to seeing. That's the offense there.
I mean, it's a Rich Rod offense. Trust it. More importantly, you're going to look at the defensive side of the ball, and you already mentioned Zach Alley, which is interesting. But I think the defensive side of the ball is going to be a little bit more important than the offensive side of the ball in terms of the coaching staff.
Without a doubt. And it's Zach Alley. He was with Rich Rod at Jacksonville State a couple years ago and with him at ULM. So he's obviously, has that connection, that familiarity there, playing opposite this kind of offense too, which I think is important. He was developed under Brent Venables. They kind of joked about he was the prodigal son of Brent Venables. He was developed back then. He was at Clemson. So he went over to be the DC at Oklahoma this past season, but he wants more of a play calling role because Brent Venables is super, super involved in calling plays in the defense. So he heads over to West Virginia to reunite with Rich Rodriguez. He's a young dude. He's only about 31 or 32 years old. So obviously he still has a ton of experience calling plays, which is kind of interesting, doing it or being with him at ULM and also doing it at Jacksonville State. But he's still pretty young. The defensive line coach is William Green. Again, connection there with Rich Rod. He was with Rich Rod at ULM, was also on defensive staff at Jacksonville State. He played for Florida back in 2008, and he won the national title with them, that year. The outside linebackers coach is Jeff Castile. He was with Rich Rod, when he was the head coach, I think back in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. And when he first got there, and then he was there the rest of the 10-year, was also there with Bill Stewart, and even in the Dana Holgers, he was there for almost 10 years. He also coached Rich Rod when he went to Arizona, and then also came back to West Virginia with Neil Brown. So he's been at West Virginia for a long time, and obviously has that rapport with Rich Rodriguez. The nickelback / like Sam linebackers is Henry Weinrich. Weinrich was the defensive analyst for Zach Alley at Oklahoma this past season, was also a defensive analyst under Zach Alley at Jacksonville State. He was on that Jacksonville State staff before Rich Rod and Zach Alley got there, but obviously was retained, and that's where he got the connection with Zach Alley and Rich Rod. The cornerbacks coach is Rod West. Rod West spent the past couple seasons coaching cornerbacks at Appalachian State. There was a coaching change there. We'll talk about that in a couple of videos there with Jake Dicker, or not Jake Dicker, excuse me. Sean Higgins or Sean Dowell-Loggins, I think, going to App State, my bad. But he was a guy that was like pretty highly rated a couple of years ago as like a 35 under 35 list, like those young coaches that they're talking about in college football. And then the safeties coach is Gabe Franklin's. He was the safeties coach at Boise State the past 4 seasons. He was there when Zach Alley was there. Zach Alley was there a couple years ago at Boise State. So there's that connection there between the two. So yeah, that defense, we talked about how important that defense side of the ball is going to be. Obviously, I'm not going to sit here and tell you this is an A+ coaching staff. I have no idea how it's going to fit. But I do think it's fun to see that crossover between Zach Alley, that blend of Zach Alley and Rich Rodriguez, and all the kind of crossover that has happened there.
Yeah, I know you were saying the message boards didn't love the hire, but like realistically, like what else can you ask for?
I think it's awesome.
Like, what else can you ask for? This dude's 31 years old, right? He's learned under Brent Venables. He coached with Rich Rod with success, and you have a ton of continuity on that side of the ball. So I don't think you can ask for much more. I know we talked about that 3-3-5 being a choice in the Big 12, but yeah, I don't have any problems with this. So let's go to expectations now. Give our grades, wrap this thing up. I'm giving this grade a B, which, by the way, means he's meeting expectations in my book, right? In A, he's exceeding. C, he's not meeting expectations. I'm giving him a flat B. And so 8-9 wins, in the Big 12 for West Virginia. I think that's very doable for them. And I think Rich Rod is going to be able to get them there, with what he does on the offense side of the football, with what he's able to do, with his connections, his history as winning as a head coach. And I think the Big 12 is very winnable. And there's a lot of parity in that conference. And you may not win 8-9 games every year, right? That's not what I'm saying. But I think you can be like that, right? Like the Neil Brown experience. You had that one season where you went 9-4 with a bowl game win. I think you can do more of that, right? Neil Brown was there for 6 years. I think you can do that more than one time in 6 years. I think like half of your years, you can get to 8 wins, right? I think that's very doable. And I don't think that's that much to ask for. So, and when West Virginia moved to the Big 12, I don't think that was necessarily the expectation, right? So the expectation has changed. Obviously, they fired Neil Brown, so it's the athletic department's expectation. But I think it's fair to say that he can meet expectations. So I'm giving it a B, and that's a good grade.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm a B plus. I'm a little bit higher, but I think part of the reason is like your expectation increases a little bit with Rich Rod, and I think that's totally fair. Mine, I'm just gonna kind of go off of what's been the reality the past 7 8 years, and I think like 7 8 wins I think keeps his job there. And so I think like you said, getting to 9 wins a couple times, 10 wins, and he's a guy that's won 10 games a lot of times in his career, and I would not be surprised if he does that. And by the way, the Big 12, say what you want about it, like it's easier than it's ever been. That in West Virginia's tenure there with all these changes, obviously Texas, Oklahoma leaving, and you've got that influx of the American talent. Although you saw BYU have success this past season as well as Arizona State, a couple of Pac-12 schools, but yeah, I'm excited. I'm high on this one here. Obviously, a B plus. I think is you're gonna say that and like maybe not get excited about it, but I think this is a good hire. I think what you did with resources available. It was not surprising that you moved off of Neil Brown, but I think we were like, well, maybe he bought himself another season. You battled injuries this year, but I do think that it was disappointing. I think you were tired of hovering around 5 6 7 win area there, and now I think this puts you in a spot where it is a safe hire. I do think you will have a higher floor than you did under Neil Brown, but I also think you have that upside there to pop when it does pop for Rich Rod. And I do think West Virginia football being back and being good is great for the Big 12. It's great for college football and all that kind of stuff.